morning. This is Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black, a retired senator. We've got John Tigas. John, great to have you with us. This morning, we've got three topics. We got the first is a powerful anti-war challenge to Representative Espaillat and some other Democrat bigwigs in Harlem. The second one is we have an interesting little dance being done with the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCall, laying the groundwork for a shooting war with China in just 2 years, 2025. And then the third one, we have a little cultural intrigue. This is a CNN article entitled Trad Wives, which means traditional wives. And there's a little bit of a social internet thing going on with women who look to traditional marriages and in some cases harken back to the 50s, according to CNN. So this is it. And what we're about to show you is we've got an incredible video, which is an intervention, a protest in Harlem by Jose Vega, who is a very bold, powerful first speaker. And his remarks are followed by those of Kynan Thistlethwaite and Dewey Donahue. The person that you'll see on the speaker's podium is Representative Espaillat, Democrat congressman and member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So with that, let's take a look at the video.
All right, here we go.
Hey, Mr. Espaillat, how about we talk about how corrupted a liar you are? Right. 50 years in Harlem is still fucked up, right? People are slumped over 125th Street. Guess what? They are slumped over and dying, and you are doing nothing about it. You don't speak for Adam Clayton Powell Jr.
We love New York.
You don't speak for the American people.
We love New York.
You are just as corrupt. And guess what? We're on the verge of nuclear war now because of you. $100 billion for Ukraine, right? So much money for Ukraine. But what about for Harlem?
This is not January 6th.
It's
this
not.
This is the 13th Congressional
and guess what?
District.
Mr. Espaillat, why don't you talk about the fact that people are dying in Harlem? I'm not going to stop unless you address me. Mr. Espaillat, how many people have died because of open-air drug trading because of you and Schumer? How many people have died, huh? You are responsible for the deaths of thousands of people here in Harlem. There's a housing crisis, a homeless crisis. You have done nothing. You are utterly useless. And guess what? Now we are on the verge of World War III with Russia. What have you done? Nothing. You've only made things worse. And everybody's going to end up dead. We're on the verge of nuclear war, people. You didn't know.
We love him anyway.
Congressman, when are you going to tell the people of your district that Germany has just declared war with NATO on Russia? Are you going to tell your district that we're on the brink of a nuclear war with Russia? Because guess what? A nuclear war will fuck a lot of things up. When are you going to actually do something for this district? When are you going to seek diplomacy with Russia? That is the most important thing concerning the
that we could have public safety, and we could have also the respect of law enforcement for our communities. We could have both. We could have both, and we deserve to have both.
It could be used to support people in the front.
Last Congress.
Do something for the people of your district. Stop
Last Congress.
Party.
Well, we love her too.
Adriana, why are you sending all of my tax money to Ukraine? I am tired of you sending all my tax money to Ukraine? You give $40 billion to Ukraine, but you only give $20 million to New Yorkers. I hate this. You're sending all my money to Ukraine when I did not ask for that.
I want to. All right.
What do you think?
Wow. Impressive confrontation on real issues, and big shout out to Jose for the boldness to be willing to make the issues that really matter the real issues. And thank goodness that there are people, you know, we think of New York often as completely woke, and yet we see that there is hope for even New York when people like Jose and his friends there are standing up for what really matters. We are on the edge of nuclear war. As the one gentleman, the second speaker, said, you know, we're going to be pretty effed up if that happens. No doubt, if there was a nuclear exchange with the United States, New York would be obliterated, you know. And so they should be concerned about this. War with Ukraine,
my apologies.
Their extinction.
My apologies. The second speaker, we have a woman with a hat and so forth. So my apologies there, but you're right. You know, here we are in Harlem, and we've got three people who are standing up, gutsy, courageous, bold, patriotic Americans. What about those kids at Yale and Harvard and all these fancy-pantsy universities who sit there with their mouths zipped shut, scared to death to speak up? Look at Jose Vega. You know, look at Kynan and at Dewey. These are Americans. These are the people who are the heart and the soul of America. They're the people who built this country, not those panty waists at Yale and Harvard who just walk in lockstep and are scared to death of their own shadows. Now, let me give you a little bit more background on what's going on. Here we had Representative Espaillat, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, standing on the podium. He's a fellow who has pledged that America will not allow Ukraine to lose this fight. Now, he says we're going to stand up for democracy around the world by supporting one of the great dictators of the world, an absolute tyrant, Zelensky, a guy who's outlawed all of his political opposition, who shut down their newspapers, who's raided the major Christian church with his secret police, dragged off priests and nuns, changed the date of Christmas, for crying out loud, in Ukraine. And this is the kind of democracy that Mr. Espaillat is fighting for. And now Espaillat had been preceded by Chuck Schumer, by Senator Kristen Gillibrand, by New York Governor Kathy Hochul, and by Mayor Eric Adams. So you have the whole panoply of those people. I don't know why this thing is not being shown on Fox News, except that it is against this insane war that we are fighting on the borders of the second greatest or first greatest nuclear superpower in the world.
And let's not forget, let's be fair here. There are plenty of Republicans supporting this as well. Lindsey Graham thinks it's great. There was I can't remember which congressman it was, but there's a Republican congressman that just put in a bill to have a bust of Zelensky made and put into the Capitol building. So,
are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding. So we've got a lot of, I mean, the Uniparty is fully at work here, and we need to acknowledge it for what it is. There's very, very few conservatives that are actually standing against this. Now, more and more people are waking up to the fact that, just as you said, Zelensky's corrupt. It was a corrupt the most corrupt nation, according to our own State Department, before we decided to support them against another corrupt nation. I mean, Russia's not a great place, but honestly, if I had to pick two places, I think I'd pick Russia. And you pointed out in the past that at least they've reformed morally in terms of what they really stand for. It's no longer a pure communist country, even though they have plenty of socialist roots still. And so neither actor is a good actor. And the bigger issue really is, how does this affect us with China? How is dumping all of our arms and money and focus on this completely winless battle? There's no good outcome that's going to come from it. And how does this affect our ability to stand in the China Sea if China decides they want to take Taiwan, or maybe even more fundamentally attack us from a cyber perspective? It's a no-win situation, and all of those protesters are right. Why are we supporting that? And why is the Uniparty joined together in spending billions and billions of dollars? And I think, unfortunately, we're learning what the answer is. We saw it before this war and what happened with Hunter Biden and all the corruption and money going to Ukraine before this war. And since then, it's been a complete, it's been a lottery for anyone that's in the military industrial complex or in NGOs in Ukraine, because they've been getting tons of money. And it's a massive money laundering effort to support people who love the global construct, who love to see this country be destroyed economically and politically so that they can justify taking over on a global basis. And it's got to stop. And hopefully more and more people are waking up, as we saw in that Brooklyn audience.
Yeah, well, I just find it so inspiring what Jose's been doing just recently is very reminiscent of some of the things that I used to do in college, and confronting almost a total wall.
This was in your long hair days, right?
What's that?
Back when you had the ponytails and beads.
Well, I was never a ponytail guy, although my hair was a bit longer and a whole lot blacker and thicker in those days. But
you wore like snakeskin boots and things like that?
No, but we had a vast anti-war movement. Now, basically, it was a very selfish movement. It wasn't a war, a movement to stop bloodshed. It was a movement to beat the draft, basically. And the Democrats got this reputation as being against war because they were protesting against the draft. But it was very communist dominated, and it was huge. And anyway, I did things I won't talk about, but yeah, I did start the only counter anti-war demonstration ever on the University of Florida campus, and I got apprehended by the police 3 times in the course of the demonstration, physically dragged out of the fray, and each time the campus police just happened to be looking the other way, and I bolt and go back into the fray. And by the time it was over, all of the war-painted commies were sullen-faced, sitting on the ground, all of their signs broken into pieces, and you had a group of former Marines, the Young Americans for Freedom, who dominated the field that particular day. So what I see from Jose, I mean, it gives me hope. I wish that intervention could be shown on every Ivy League campus in this country, and just shame those kids who are so submissive, so fearful, so indoctrinated that they can't think for themselves. They're highly intelligent, but they're not at all smart.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of difference between being able to compute, large figures in your head and do calculus and physics, and being somebody who can look at a situation and say, boy, this is downright stupid. Now here we got people in Ivy League who don't know the difference between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
A 3-year-old child knows that.
It wasn't that long ago when Dr. Robert Malone went on Joe Rogan, and I think it was a real turning point in the whole COVID piece when he brought up the issue of what he called mass psychosis. And basically he was repeating something that's been known since the 1800s and laid out, which is that if you get people isolated in the midst of a huge amount of fear, you can galvanize them together to agree upon something that's not true. And we saw that with COVID. And there was a recent article out of Zero Hedge, which came from it was called The Burning Platform. And a really interesting article that kind of goes to this. And basically the gentleman said that 30% of the population is still in mass psychosis. They're literally hypnotized. They don't know how to think. They're stuck in this world in which fear drove them into thinking that they could do great things. Their religion became social distance and lockdown and mask and vaccinate. And they thought they were doing a really good thing. They become convinced that they were going to save the world. Their salvation was based on following this new religion around COVID. The COVIDians, as a lot of people call them. And they're still stuck there. And a lot of young people at college campuses, I mean, many college campuses, certainly the Ivy League, you still have to have a vax and a booster to go to class there. I mean, they are keeping them in mass psychosis. And the interesting thing about this article, he made a great point. He said 30% of the population fell into mass psychosis. 40% of the population just went whichever way the wind was blowing, which we see in so much of the time. People that just don't really have hard convictions. They just want to get along and be liked, and they don't do anything. He said 30% of the population did not get vaxxed. That was the people who were still critically thinking and asking hard questions and realized there's something not right here and didn't get vaxxed. But he said out of that 30%, only a third of them, basically 10% of the population, bothered to do something and to speak against and try to convince others that they need to reawaken to what's going on in this country. And we see it now with Ukraine, the latest new fear crisis that we're going to have Russia doing something to us, climate change, and now gas stoves of all things. They continue to rule by fear. And as long as they're able to do that, people are going to fall into this mass psychosis and go on to the next great thing that's going to lead to their salvation. And so waking up people who are stuck in an environment of mass psychosis is really, really difficult. And what this author said, which I think is great, he says if the 10% of the population don't continue to work on the remaining 20% that didn't get vaxxed and make sure they start to speak, and that 30% doesn't work on the 40%, we're gone. It's game over. We as a civilization going into this fourth turning, if you haven't paid attention to it, it's a whole nother book around that we're in a crisis mode that comes every 80 years. We saw it in the American Revolution, Civil War, World War II, and now again, there is a time of crisis, an 80-year cycle, and we're in it right now. And if we don't rise up and get people out of mass psychosis, and at a minimum help the 40% that are blowing in the wind to start realizing the wind is blowing a different direction, it's not going to change. And what we saw in that video by Jose and the other individuals was people speaking and waking people up. We need more of it. And we need to applaud that behavior because it's going to take that level of evangelism to wake people out of the religion that they're in, which is a false religion. It's a false religion based on man. And until we got people once again believing in a holy God who created this universe and following his principles in the way that we live, and we're done as a society. So with that, I turn the floor back over to you, sir.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the Republican Party, that all of the hype for war and so forth is not. It's not strictly a Democrat issue. Now, the only anti-war movement that I can see is on the Republican side. I don't see anything on the Democrat side, but certainly the drive for war is powerfully supported by the Republican Party, including Fox News, with the exception of Tucker Carlson. But anyway, the next story that we have, and we'll wrap up with this one, because we got so fired up about the first issue. This is a very interesting story that shows you how the deep state starts wars. Wars don't just start. It's not, China's not trying to attack anybody. Russia's not trying to attack us. They're trying to defend their own borders. But here's a very interesting story, and it shows you how these are coordinated. These aren't just, oh, somebody says something and then somebody else says something. It begins with General Minahan, and General Minahan, he is he's a 4-star general, and he's the head of the Air Mobility Command, which is a major combatant command, about 50,000 people. And General Mike Minahan sent a memo to all of his subordinate commanders. And he's talking about war with China. And he says, I hope I'm wrong. My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. He's predicting war with a major Asian land power, a nuclear power, starting in 2 years. Now, you would think, oh, well, this is a goofy, whacked out guy who just needs to be relieved for cause and fired the next day. But no, who comes and begins to parrot what he says? This is Representative Michael McCall, Republican of Texas, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And he says, I hope he's wrong. I think he's right, unfortunately. Okay, so you've got the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House saying, yes, I think we're going to be fighting a ground, land, sea war. We're going to attack China in 2 years. Then you have, lo and behold, he just happens to run across this in the news. You have former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, one of the great war hawks and so forth. He's not so big on fighting wars himself, but he's very big on having other people fight them. And
like most politicians.
Yes, like the vast majority. And Mike Pompeo says, well, he says, I take General Minahan to be serious. We're not doing enough to prepare to deter the Chinese Communist Party. Now, if we fight China, we're not going to be fighting the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to be fighting against the Chinese people, the men, the women who are out, manufacturing our Christmas gifts and our cars and everything else. And then Pompeo goes on. He's a very crafty guy. He says, talking about the war with the Chinese, he says, I think he's really, it's hard to put timelines on any of these things. He says 2025. In other words, Pompeo, he doesn't want to be quoted as saying we're going to be fighting the Chinese in 2025, but he's very crafty. He says 2025, and he's citing to this general. Now here's a Democrat who pushes back to some extent. Representative Adam Smith, Democrat of Washington State, a ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, and he says he's really worried when anyone starts talking about war with China being inevitable. And then, quote, he says, I want to be completely clear. It's not only inevitable, it's highly unlikely, Smith said. Generals need to be very cautious about saying we're going to war. Well, amen to that. Because when the time comes, people like Pompeo and Mr. McCall, Representative McCall of Texas, are going to be in their underground bunker, sipping their cocktails, watching the nuclear explosions on some kind of a computer screen, while our children, our grandchildren, our wives, our fathers, mothers, daughters, nephews, nieces are going to be having their skin burned off up above, while these clowns sit down there chuckling about the glories of the one world order. So
Yeah.
it should be very troubling to Americans that we are now talking. We're not only on the verge of sending jets that are capable of attacking Moscow and St. Petersburg in Russia, and we're not only dumping vast sums of wealth into overthrowing the nation of Russia, but we're saying, okay, here's the timeline. 2 years, we're going to fight against China. We're going to have World War III. There's no way you can say this is not World War III. And they're declaring it, but they don't want to be real upfront with the American people about it.
Yeah, it's really disturbing, and it's easy to forget that majority of our population now. You and I grew up under the Cold War, but since the late '80s, everyone that's grown up since then, that's almost 40 years. So people 40 and under don't really know what this thing called nuclear holocaust might look like. We grew up with, it was on TV. I remember a program. It's called The Day After that was shown. It was one of the most highly watched. It was watched as much as the Super Bowl back in the early '80s or late '70s. That kind of gave a scenario of what it would be like after a nuclear exchange, and people were scared to death of it. Reagan was made famous the phrase "peace through strength," and unfortunately, we are now weakened. Our defense is weakened. We have a weak president that people, anyone internationally recognizes isn't, got all of his synapses firing, and certainly isn't the one running the White House. So we're in a weakened state in every way, shape, and form, and becoming weaker by sending all of our supplies and money and F-16s and M1 tanks to Russia, while we have this threat. Truly, it is a threat. I don't know how militarily it's a threat, but China is certainly an economic threat to the United States. And we've got to deal with that, and we're not. We're completely distracted from it. I think that's what the real problem is. And whatever 4 Star says or doesn't say, or other people say, no matter what is repeated, the reality is we're not ready to fight from a position of strength right now, because we've been so distracted. Whether in the military, it's trying to get rid of everybody that actually has the courage to say, I'm not going to take a shot, or whether it's emphasizing pronouns over war readiness. We're in a really difficult situation, and it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. We're at least 2 years away from an election cycle to get a new, commander in chief in, and then it can take years to fix those problems. So the next couple of years are very, very dangerous times. And I'm not sure, Senator, you've dealt with these things both on a individual, on a state, and even a national level from your experience. What can be done in the midst of an environment where, at best, the Republicans control just one house of Congress? What can be done right now to set things straight so that we're not in a predicament where what's going on is going to lead to potential nuclear catastrophe?
Well, we're going to have to be able to get the word out. People are hearing one point of view. That's fine, but they need to hear the other point of view. And thanks to Elon Musk and Twitter, all of a sudden we're on the Twitter platform. Unbelievable. This would never have happened before he took over. So there's an opportunity now for people to speak out, and they need to do that. We need our churches and our parishes. We need religious people to stand up for peace.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus told us, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." Where are the children of God? Where are the peacemakers? Everybody's talking about war. I did a video, or it was a podcast with a fellow who was sort of a religious broadcaster, and his view was, well, okay, maybe we're headed to nuclear war, but we can't just let Putin get away with this. Well, you're talking about nuclear annihilation of the entire world, and because somebody has dared you or something. I mean, it's just, we've reached a level of nonsense. We don't think as rational people anymore.
Yeah. And it's all feelings based. You made a great point. It's almost as if we're treating Putin like Trump's mean tweets, that it's better to get rid of mean tweets and have the complete collapse of your country. And in the case of Putin, the fact that you got a guy who's not a great guy, who's done some bad things, but that we're willing to risk nuclear annihilation for him taking back parts of what have historically been Russian lands to protect himself from a NATO threat, because they've got about 600 years of people coming from the West to annihilate them, and they don't like that. And it's cost them millions and millions of lives, so they want a buffer zone. It doesn't seem like it takes a lot to think that one through, that maybe we might have caused that conflict by what we've been doing with NATO and supporting Ukraine. But for whatever reason, people can't even think that one through. So it's ridiculous. We are a stupid, dumb people who can't even reason properly, and we're more concerned about putting up Ukraine flags on our Instagram or Facebook than we are about recognizing that we may just have committed suicide. Crazy.
You know, and we've taken the Ukrainian people with us, because 2 months after Russia crossed over the border, Russia and Ukraine were sitting at the peace table and had almost hammered out a final peace accord between the two of them that would have settled the war. It would have provided some independence to the Donbass republics, which they're Russian. The people speak Russian. And we would have saved probably 150,000 people from dying. But what did we do? The White House told Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of England, get over there and tell him to knock this stuff off, stop talking peace and get back to war. We've got a huge investment in this. We put a lot of money. Barack Obama laid all these things in place so that we could have a war. And we're not going to let you make peace. So the United States blocked peace from unfolding. So most of the deaths, I would say, 4/5 of the deaths occurred after that, maybe more. It may have been 90% of the deaths, probably was 90%, occurred because we blocked peace from taking place, a peace that was acceptable to both sides.
You know, there was a gentleman on Tucker Carlson last night. I don't remember his name, but he said something kind of shocking, but I'm going to repeat it. And he said, America is now the great terrorist. We are the ones that destroyed millions of lives in the Middle East and in Afghanistan, and we're doing it again now in Ukraine. We are the ones driving conflict. And it's shocking to think that way because we used to always think of ourselves as liberators, but we're not right now. We're not liberating anything. We go in, we cause destruction. We spend billions and billions of dollars to line the pockets of people in the military industrial complex and their friends. And then we back out and leave a trail of destruction. It's disgusting. It makes no sense anymore. We have to see this change. And I don't suppose you can come up with a perfect solution in the next 30 seconds to close this out, but close this out with, again, some measure of hope.
Well, I think if you want to look for a measure of hope, certainly what we're doing here, I think, has some impact. But to me, I am truly inspired when I see Jose Vega, when I see young people standing up, using their minds, thinking rationally, and taking a stand. I hope that what he and what the others have done, I hope that this spreads. I hope it picks up. I hope, there's got to be some kid at Yale who's got enough moxie to watch what Jose did and the others did and say, well, those guys are right. I'm going to start talking and I'm going to start speaking out right here on Yale campus or Harvard campus or Princeton or wherever. But we need to have a move back towards rationality. We need people who can tell the difference between a man and a woman, who can do some very fundamental thought process. But in any event, I hope you've enjoyed the show today. I certainly, every time I watch Jose Vega, I'm inspired. His video is on Twitter. It's under the name Jose Vega, VEGA. I would encourage all of you to go to that, get that video, and share it with your networks. So with that, I think we'll sign off for the day. John, thank you for everything, and we will see you again. This has been Focus on the News.